Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Andy, aka the Opinionated Brit, and this is another episode of it's not the podcast, of a podcast, and it's actually the Take Care Men, a mental health podcast. I have got my co-host, Todd Stanfield, here with me.
Hello,
How's it going,
everyone.
Todd?
Good. Hot here. Very hot here.
It is. I suppose we should note. Obviously, I'm recording it. It's about it's just gone. It's about 8:45 here, and it's you're sort of 6 hours behind. So
Right. So it's like 2:45 in the afternoon here in
the
Tennessee. I'm in the central time zone in the U.S.
the time difference may be a challenge for us. Obviously, with this podcast. It's been a nice day here. Actually, it's been warm. I mean, it's been sort of probably the low 20s, and we were just talking before we recorded. That's nothing compared to some of the temperatures you have. But I hate the heat. I really do hate the heat. I don't mind it if I'm on holiday, but yeah, day to day, it's not for me. I'm like the summer Scrooge. I really
Yeah. If you could just skip over like July and August, I would be completely fine. If we could just cut those 2 months out, that's great. That would be great.
Yeah. No, it's not for me, the heat. I much prefer winter. But anyway, we digress. As I said, this is a sort of collaboration between myself and Todd. The title of this podcast is kind of up for discussion, isn't it? We haven't really set a name for the podcast, and this episode really is just an intro into sort of what we want to do, why we're doing the podcast, and where we hope it would go. I suppose let's start off, Todd. Obviously, introduce yourself, let people know who you are, where you come from, and all that good stuff.
Okay. As Andy said, my name's Todd Stanfield. Some of you may know me from the Take Care Man channel, where I've been doing wet shaving videos, I guess close to a year and a half now. I have to go back and see exactly how long it's been. But so my day job, so to speak, is I am a professor of social work. And I actually do that for three different places. I have my main job that pays the bills. Then I have two side teaching gigs. I teach for two other universities. So I actually teach for like three different places. So yeah, I've got a lot going on. But I was originally worked as a social worker. So I worked in child welfare. So I was a child welfare worker for a couple of years. Then I worked in mental health, both adult and child mental health. And some of my responsibilities included, working with adults who were dealing with just day-to-day struggles, but also those that were dealing with more serious and persistent mental illnesses. And I guess, just personal stuff. Married, I've been married for 24 years. I just celebrated that at the end of last month. Yeah. That's no small feat, let me tell you.
You get you get less for murder sometimes.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. Yeah, and we've got one kid. She's 17. She works as a barista and just finished up she's midway through her first semester of earning college credits. She's still in high school, but she's taking a class to earn college credits. But yeah, that's pretty much me.
Cool, thanks, Todd. I'm glad you mentioned that you were a professor, because obviously we talk quite regularly, and I think Todd's a little bit modest about the fact that he's a professor, but he is a professor, so that means he is an expert in what he teaches, and he's an expert, subject matter expert. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We can talk about that openly now. So we have a professor on the podcast. I don't think I know any other professors, if I'm honest, not personally anyway.
So in the UK, like if you're building a fence, okay, I know this is going off the rails, but you're going to put a post in the ground, like a post for the fence. Like, so here in the States, we have like a tool that we call a post hole digger. That's what they call it, a post hole digger, right? And so the running joke among a lot of people is that PhD stands for post hole digger. Like, and the thing is like, I know people who basically have almost purchased their PhD. And by that, I mean, they've had people write for them and do their statistics and all that kind of stuff, which for the record, that's not me. But yeah, I try not to, but the original name of my channel was Elmer Fudd, spelled with PHUD instead of FUD. And to me, it just came off a little pretentious, so I decided to change it. So, but yeah, I love what I do, and I love being a social worker and a clinical social worker, and so yeah, I'm just glad to do this kind of thing. This has been one of my desires to do this type of podcast for a long time, and I know we're going to get into a little bit about why we're doing it, but I'll just briefly mention that in my work as a professor, I kept running across a lot of this stuff that was talking about like the rising rate of suicide among middle-aged men, and it just like grabbed me like around the throat because when I was going through my training, we talked so much about much older men, like 85 plus, and then also like adolescent girls, that kind of thing. But this is a relatively new phenomenon, and it really just grabbed me. And there's not a whole lot of research out there on why that's happening. And even though that research is not there, I just knew I wanted to be a part of entering into this space. And for myself, just a middle-aged man, I also know the challenges that come with it. And so, yeah, this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And so, reaching out to me and say, "Hey, you interested in doing this?" was the perfect, beginning for me to jump into this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, really. I mean, a little bit about me, and I'll say for everybody watching, because this is going to be put out as, I suppose, a video and an audio podcast. So I think we're going to use Todd's platform, obviously, Take Care Man website and platform, probably to put out various content. We'll use, obviously, for my podcast, I put my content out on Podbean and Spotify and that sort of stuff. So there'll be a mixture of ways you can watch this and listen to this podcast. Obviously, it's not specifically going to be just a video podcast, but I suppose a little bit about me. And I'll say now, if I'm looking away while you're talking, or if we have a guest, it's not because I'm being rude. My notes are on my phone. Here we go. And I'm frantically trying to figure out how to stop it from locking, so that I don't have to keep opening it. And I do know this. So if anybody's watching wants to tell me, well, then there is nobody watching other than me and you. But I suppose the plan is maybe to do like a live podcast at some point.
Yeah, that would be fun. I'd love that.
Anyway, I'm waffling. I'm Andy Wilmer. You may know me from probably more specifically the Opinionated Brit podcast, where I speak to guys from the wet shaving community, the hair pomade community, the YouTube scene, and I also have my own YouTube channel, obviously the Opinionated Brit. I suppose my background is I spent 13 years in the British Army, in the Royal Engineers. A catalyst, I suppose, for me doing that. It wasn't something I ever wanted to do. I was never passionate about it. My granddad was he was a soldier in the Second World War. He was with the First Airborne, but it was the Twin Towers, and I'd probably say a lot of people who joined at the same time as me. I joined in 2002. That was probably a catalyst for a lot of people joining the military, both in the UK and the US. So I spent 13 years going to various different places, Northern Ireland, Iraq, Afghanistan, Canada, Kenya, Kuwait for a little time. That was only like an hour and a half when we were in Iraq, though. I got injured. When was that? 2013, I think it was. So I suffered quite a bad eye injury, a bungee cord. I don't know if you know what a bungee cord is. A big bit of elastic with two metal hooks on the end, usually. So that sprang back and hit me in my eye while I was on exercise. It was a freak accident, really, but that sort of ended my career. I was surplus to requirements, and I kind of. And it is kind of all relevant because it's leading on to the reason why we're doing this podcast. But I ended up getting medically discharged. Didn't get a lot of help from the government, the British government, as a lot of veterans don't. I probably did the typical soldier thing, the alpha male thing, and made out that I was all right, and I was probably in a better place than I was. So I left 2015. I had various different jobs. I think I'm on my 6th job now since leaving. I found the transition quite difficult. And I suppose the main catalyst, so my background sort of military. I'm a project manager now, so I'm a project manager for a company working on Ministry of Justice contracts, so various prisons across Yorkshire and Humberside. Um, and I suppose the main reason for me, I obviously got in touch with Todd and I said, look, hey, I watch your videos. I know some of it, the content's obviously relevant to health, so mental health and that side of stuff. I'm suffering myself with some sort of, well, I suppose I would say significant mental health issues at the minute, and most of that has been sort of work related. And obviously, I reached out to Todd and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing something?" And then obviously, the rest is history, as they say. I'm married, so I've been married for, I want to say, I should know this, since 2017. Is it 2000? No, 2011. No, yeah, 2011. I should know that, shouldn't I? So I've got three young kids. I've got two girls and a boy. They're all under 6, so it's quite a hectic life. And I mean, I'm 38, so we're quite old in terms of having kids. Um, and I suppose, yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm passionate about mental health, not just because I've been suffering myself, but obviously veterans in the UK don't get treated very well. And this isn't a platform, this isn't going to be a political podcast or a political movement. There may be some elements of it. But yeah, I think it's important, obviously, we talk about or highlight the issues with mental health. And obviously, Todd's going to, I'm just looking at my phone again, so I'm not being rude. That's me in a nutshell. I live in the UK, obviously. I live in a place called Yorkshire. So anybody that doesn't know, and there may be some people, the UK is split up into counties, and then it's similar to your states. But I live in the county of North Yorkshire, and it's not as posh as it sounds. I'm from Oxford originally, so maybe I have got a little bit of a posher accent. I've never really picked up the accent. I lived in the northeast all my life, but like near, you may know, you ever heard of a Geordie?
Yeah, I have. In fact,
There you go.
So I recently did my ancestry.com like DNA thing, and that's like that whole region, particularly like Yorkshire, is where a lot of my family comes from. And there's actually a couple of towns in the UK in two different parts called Stanfield, like it's named Stanfield. It's like the name of the town, a little small place. So yeah, been trying to familiarize myself with English geography, but yeah, I know very little, but I do know.
It is tiny. It isn't tiny. The UK is tiny in comparison to the US, and I didn't realize how big it was. My in-laws live in Florida, and I didn't realize how big it was until we landed at Orlando. And it's not the first time I've been there, but it's the first time I've sort of been there as an adult. We landed at Orlando, and we had to drive I think it was something like 2.5 hours to get to where. And this was still in Florida.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, it's you were talking about my PhD. I mean, you being a soldier, being a veteran, you learned quite a bit traveling the world and have seen a lot and have gone through a lot. And I think that, yes, people are going to want to tune in to hear someone who has some knowledge about it from my perspective, but also, as I mean, that's a big population of people that are struggling with mental health issues, or those that are veterans and also first responders, or two particular categories of people. It's not only those folks, but anyway, I just think that what you bring is amazing, and you may mention this in the future, but I thought you might touch on the I guess you would call it a charity or an organization that you're involved with, that you help sort of I guess raise awareness and possibly like raise funds for, related to helping veterans in the UK.
So I'm a beneficiary of a military charity called Help for Heroes. Obviously in the UK, and I don't know what it is like in the US, but in the UK, basically, when you leave the military, whether that's via your own accord, if you decide to leave, or whether you get injured, the government then wash their hands of you. They're not interested. They ask you to go and to a war zone and protect our shores, but then actually when it comes to it, they're not interested when you leave. And that is what it is. You know what I mean? It's wrong, in my opinion. And you're a number at the end of the day. If one person gets killed, there's another 10 to replace you. But if the government are asking you, I say not asking you, everyone volunteers to do it, don't get me wrong, but the government do next to nothing. So especially when people get injured, it's for military charities to pick up the pieces, which is a shame. And they obviously rely on public donations to fund them and help
Mhm.
support the people that have been wounded, injured, and sick. So yeah, Help for Heroes. I'm a beneficiary of Help for Heroes. I'm also an ambassador for them, which I'm very proud of. But obviously, the charity has taken quite a battering during the pandemic. Obviously,
Mhm.
with especially in the UK, with everybody being locked up for so long, the people couldn't get out and they couldn't fundraise and they couldn't do all the wacky events that people do. I mean, the stuff that guys do just to raise money, that is it's insane. Some of the stuff the guys do, and it can be anything. You know, what I mean, it can be running, I don't know, 10 marathons in 10 days, or it can be, I don't know, sitting in a bath of ice for a week. It could be anything. But the
Mhm.
charities, not just Help for Heroes, there's the Royal British Legion, there's Blesma, there's all sorts of different charities, the Veterans Charity, and they rely on public donation. So I'm passionate about that, and part of what they do is help people with mental health, veterans. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that another
Yeah.
time on another podcast. But going back to the point of this podcast or this episode, I think we've touched on it briefly, but I think we want to do it to bring some good to the not just the world, but I think we have a shared interest in the wet shaving community. Um, that can be quite a powerful community. A lot of the guys on there are quite generous, and the message can be spread far and wide. But I think let's talk briefly about what mental health is, because although people hear it all the time, they may hear it at work, they may hear it on the news, in the newspapers or whatever. Let's talk about mental health. What you think, and you're probably
Yeah.
more of an expert than I am, so I'll let you start this one off.
Well, I'm going to start it off in a real professorial way, but trust me, I'm going to bring it back to the practical. But I just like to point out that, like in Western cultures, we separate health and mental health. So, in Europe and the US, we talk about health and mental health like they're separate things. But in Eastern cultures, they just talk about health. And so there's less of a stigma there because they just realize that mental health and health are connected. They're one thing. I mean, health is health. And unfortunately, in Western cultures, we tend to separate it and we sort of break it out. So I like to think of mental health as one aspect of the larger aspect of health. But that said, when we talk about mental health specifically, we're primarily talking about emotions or feelings and thoughts or cognitions. So the things that we're thinking, the things that we're feeling. And when we look at those things that we end up calling disorders, those tend to either affect predominantly your emotions or your thoughts, and sometimes both, right? And when we're talking about depression, anxiety, we would traditionally call those mood disorders, meaning they affect your emotions or your mood. But then there's some other disorders that tend to affect people's thinking more than it does their emotions. And obviously, how you think is tied to your emotions. Those things are related. But we've kind of started. I've noticed in a lot of circles we use the term mental health to kind of just be a blanket coverage for even mental health problems, rather than talking about mental health as almost as a goal. You know what I mean? Like as a goal that we all have to work towards for ourselves, like like we maintain our physical health, also trying to maintain our mental health. And so, what a lot of people point to the importance of trying to be preventative in our mental health and proactive. In other words, not just responding to problems or issues that arise, but also just being proactive about trying to live your life and have a lifestyle in such a way that you're heading off those problems. And so when we talk about mental health, I think we have to think kind of broadly in terms of not just the problems that come up that are sort of in crisis, which is usually when people end up seeking help, is when they just can't, they're having a hard time functioning. But also just understanding that it's something that we all have to be proactive about and stay on top of, because nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Oh, I think I'll become clinically depressed." You know what I mean? Like that's not how it's not how it works. Like, it sneaks up on you. And for the record too, for me personally, and some people, I mean, I don't think this is a particularly controversial take, take, but some people feel this way. But to me, substance abuse substance abuse issues are mental health issues as well. And in fact, I mean, what we know for most people who are struggling, whether it be a drug addiction or with alcoholism, is they generally are trying to self-medicate some underlying issue related to
Yeah.
mental health. So whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever. So and here in the U.S., the American Psychiatric Association, they published something called the DSM, which is just an acronym for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it includes substance abuse issues. So at least in the U.S. and in terms of the way things are diagnosed, substance abuse issues, including alcoholism, are viewed as mental health issues, as well. A term that gets used here in the U.S., I'm not sure if it gets used internationally much, is a lot of places like to call mental health behavioral health, which I I'm not entirely sure why that is. I don't like that phrasing, but because to me it implies that you should just you could just behave differently. Like it's a choice that you're
Yeah.
going through what you're going through, and anybody that's gone through, and I think we're both going to touch on sort of the nature of our own mental health experiences, but anybody who's gone through anything that like clinical depression or crippling anxiety or PTSD or panic disorders or schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, any of that knows how painful it is, and nobody would choose to behave that way, so to speak. So it's I don't really care for that term, behavioral health, and again, I wish we would get to a point in all of our cultures where we just talked about health and we understood that mental health was a part of it. And as you said, Andy, we're going to try to stay away from the political, but I would say we will try to stay away from the partisan politics, meaning like talking about particular parties or politicians. But the discussion around policy is pretty much unavoidable, like you touched on with what a poor job the government does there in terms of taking care of veterans when they get back. And two, this is true for insurance companies around the world, right? Insurance programs, whether it be through a government or through your employer or whatever. This whole issue of parity is something that's talked a lot about in policy arenas, meaning that parity as a goal, meaning insurance parity, meaning that you have the same quality of coverage for mental health issues as you do physical health issues. So just like you might be able to go to your physician, your doctor, to get help for high blood pressure or diabetes or whatever, that same thing would be true for depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. And what remains true in the vast majority of the world is that there's a two-tiered system. There's the system for getting mental health services and there's a system for getting physical health services, and they're nowhere near equal. And so there's still this separation of mental health from regular health when in fact they're one thing. And what to me drives this home, and I was actually talking with somebody in the wet shaving community who's going through some physical symptoms, and in talking with them, I'm pretty convinced that much of their physical symptoms are stemming from the stress that they're going through currently. But that's the thing, is that mental health affects your physical health, and the reverse is true too. When we're going through physical health challenges, it affects our mental health. I'm glad to see a somewhat of an increase of people being willing to talk about, men's mental health. Obviously, that's part of what we want to be about on this podcast. But I do think that we, part of what we'll do is we'll frequently sort of touch back on that. What is mental health? What does it mean? How do we know if we're mentally healthy? How can we even talk about this in a way that other people understand it? So that's a little bit just from my perspective. So what's mental health mean to you, Andy?
Yeah, no, that's a real good, I suppose, high level overview of what mental health is. And I suppose you could say you're the expert on it, not me. I'm just the idiot that wanted to put this together. But I think for me, everybody will look at mental health in a different way, and everybody will perceive it as being a different thing. But I think one of the key things with mental health is education. I think a lot of people still don't understand it or think it's not real. And I'll put my hand up and I'll say PTSD is a real big one within the veteran community and people that have been out to Iraq, Afghanistan, and wherever. And I've sat there myself and thought, well, actually, PTSD is not real. Just get on with it. You know what I mean? It's not. It's an excuse not to function properly, or and and I am ashamed to admit it, to say that really, because I've got to a point now where I actually think I'm suffering, and this may probably lead on to the next part of this episode. But I'm at a point now where I actually think I'm suffering from. So for anybody, I think it's also important. People listening to this podcast may not know what the terms are that we, or the abbreviations we use.
True.
So PTSD.
True.
PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD. Yeah, that's right, isn't it?
PTSD. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
I thought it was. And another thing I think to mention about this podcast is it's not going to be ultra serious. It's not going to be doom and gloom. No. We want it to be lighthearted. So, I mean, me and Todd, we haven't been talking that long, so it'll take us a while to get into our rhythm, and kind of judge each other. But it doesn't. We don't want it to be a serious. Well, we do and we don't.
We may debate things like is Jar Jar Binks a good character in the Star Wars universe?
Well, we might do, and we might discuss how that affects people's mental health.
That's right.
PTSD. So I genuinely think so. I've been through a course of counselling recently. I say recently; it finished probably in January through Help the Heroes, and it came. I can just hear some screaming outside, and it's one of those screams. You hear a scream, and you think that's not a normal scream,
right? And right. I can hear it slightly in the background.
It is.
It's not one of your kids or your wife.
I think it is, and I'm going to open my window and make sure everything's all right. But I'm going to carry on recording because it adds a little bit of.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit while you step away and check on that. So. Which is, part of like what we have to do as husbands and fathers. That's part of the reason I called my channel "Take Care Man," is because it's not just about taking care of yourself, but those around you. But yeah, just to that acronym of PTSD, I'll note that a lot of people like to take the D out of it, particularly people in the post-traumatic stress community, because and there's a lot of people that do not like to talk about mental health issues as disorders, and I think that's important to talk about. So a lot of people would just say. PTS, so post-traumatic stress, and not necessarily add the disorder part there. So
everything's fine. It's
good.
Not it's not one of my kids. It's one of our friends' children. So yeah, that's all right. He can
whatever.
He can be. Yeah, that's fine. It's not my responsibility. So after the sort of the counselling I was having, it came to light that I've kind of thought of this anyway for a while, that I've got autism, or I'm on that spectrum, and I think again a lot of people don't realise that autism is a form of mental health. Some people have it a lot more severe than others. Everybody actually is on that spectrum, whether that's like here or right up here. But so the therapist or counsellor kind of said, well, actually, I think you may have autism. So I did that. There's a form you fill in, or it's like a screening like questionnaire, and I was just below the threshold of actually being on that spectrum, which I think really that it's not the best way of diagnosing it anyway, because it comes out of people in different ways. But
right.
But part of that, when I thought about it more, I think actually the transition from the military to the civilian world has been traumatic, and people associate PTSD in the military, especially with witnessing a traumatic event. So one of their friends being blown up, somebody being shot, somebody being killed. But actually, it is just a traumatic event that can trigger that PTSD. And for me, that traumatic event has been me coming out of the army after 13 years, being wrapped up in that bubble, being told where to go, when to do it, what to take. And then sort of, I suppose, I was thrown out. You know what I mean? I was thrown out and sort of went, off you go, see you later. And there is no real transition period. They do what is called there's a company or an agency called the Career Transition Partnership, and they basically, regardless of whether you do 4 years, 5 years, 15 years, 20 plus years, everybody gets the same period. I think it's about 2 weeks, and 2 weeks is not long enough to kind of adjust from the military to the civilian world. So that's one thing that isn't fit for purpose. My door's just open, so no doubt the cat will be up as well. So Basil may make an appearance at some point. It's all going down. but yeah, so I think that's part of. So I suppose it does. This is sort of transitions into the next part of this episode. So our own personal experience with
Mm-hmm.
mental health. So I'll start. So like I said, I didn't really think PTSD was a thing until actually I've sat there and thought, well, actually, I think I'm suffering with it, and a lot of my issues. So I've been diagnosed with depression recently. Probably I say recently, a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months. Sorry, I've been suffering massively with stress, anxiety, and these are all things I suppose as a man you're not supposed to. I suppose in the stereotypical male world, you're not supposed to suffer from. We're supposed to be the alpha males, and we're not supposed to show weakness, and that's just a traditional, old-fashioned outlook on a male. But I got to the point, and it was the work pressures that were building up and building up. And I will get on to the I may name and shame at some point, but it got to a point where I was just, and it's not just me, the unit or the business unit that I work under, we were all under a lot of pressure, and we always are. We aren't resourced properly for the job that we do, and it got to the point where I'm like, I can't cope with this. And I'd gone to my line manager and I'd said, look, I can't cope with this. I'm under a load of stress. I'm not sleeping. I'm struggling to do the job I want to do to the ability I want to do it. My family life has been affected. And he just kind of went, well, what do you want me to do? And he didn't say that, but that was the feeling I got. And it comes back to the whole education thing, that actually maybe he's never had that training to go, well, I don't know how I deal with this. And his automatic autopilot is to just push me over to the employee assistance program. But there's two elements of it. There's obviously the veteran side of it, which I am passionate about, and you'll hear me bleating on about it because I'm a veteran and I've been through it. Got the t-shirt. And then there's the civilian side of it, and they just maybe he's not being an arsehole, but maybe he's just not equipped to cope with that.
Right.
So that's when I went to the doctors and I said, look, I told him just exactly the same. He said, well, I think you've got depression. I think you've got stress. I want to sign you. I think you should be signed off work for a period. And because my upbringing in the military, I'm just programmed to get on with it. So the right thing to do, me and personally, I always put myself in somebody else's shoes. If I'm going to say something to someone, I'll put it in there. I'll try and get the way I'd want me to react. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if that was me, I would have said, right, go and get yourself sorted. Take 2 weeks off. Go and get yourself sorted, and then come back and we'll talk about it and we'll see what we can do. But it was just kind of, well, it is what it is. So I've never, up until that point, up until like probably January this year, I've never really suffered massively with any form of mental issues or mental health issues. I mean, I was diagnosed when I was in Iraq with depression, but I don't really think I was depressed. I think it was probably just a lot of pressure and stress.
Right.
And then I've got to this point now where I kind of get mental health. I do know from personal experience it is a real thing, and it is affecting my mental state. You know what I mean? And I don't feel like I'm the person I want to be. I don't feel like I'm me. And I think it's important to note though that mental health issues and I suppose conditions, I don't know what's the right term to use. I don't want to be derogatory to people. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think, for me, I don't think there's any right or wrong terms. I think as long as you're speaking of your own experience, particularly, you just have to talk, about what your experience is. But it's standard practice for people to call them mental health disorders or mental illnesses. A real popular thing during the '90s was to call them brain disorders because there obviously is a biological chemical component to mental illness. But yeah, I mean, I think illnesses, disorders, are fine to use that term. I think some people fight against it just because particularly for something like autism, ADD, those kinds of things. A lot of people are resistant sometimes to call those disorder because people will see, as much as you said on like a spectrum, is that you have people that are what we call neurotypical, meaning they see the world, they process the world like the most people do, and then there's people that are not neurotypical, right? They're sort of neurodivergent and they see the world differently. So people have different views on that. Like I have no problems, with using the term disorder or illness because oftentimes it may be more of a mismatch of the person with society. In other words, if society were more accepting of that type of person, it wouldn't be a disorder, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think disorder is fine to use. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, using that term myself. But,
well, we'll use that, and if we get to the point where we've got a platform where people can respond, and if they want to raise their issues with that, that's fine. That's that you tell us what you want us to refer to as. I mean, and there's
I think that'd be a great question. I think to post to our viewers and listeners is what they think about that issue.
There is no right or wrong, I suppose, answer. But yeah, as I was saying, I think it's important to note that, especially things with depression, stress, anxiety, they are not lifelong conditions, or they don't have to be lifelong conditions. Because I know some people, and this it will get dark, I'm sure, at some point. Suicide, I guess, is the point where people get to the feeling that there is no help, there is nowhere they can go, and nobody really can help them. Whereas, I suppose I'm quite fortunate that I'm going to be getting help from Help for Heroes again, and I can see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. For me, I think getting a new job will help me out massively. But yeah, I think it's important to just let people know that it isn't always going to be there. There is help for people. So
right. That's right. And that's an important message, and well, I'm sure we'll talk about in future episodes. But is to get help. I mean, the mental illnesses can be terminal. They can be terminal illnesses if not treated. Right? Like not everybody who experiences a mental illness will end up suicidal, but it can and does happen, particularly for people that never get treatment. And so it's important to treat it as a terminal illness at times. And there is, even with something like clinical depression, there is a small part of the population that doesn't respond well to treatments. There's about 5%, about 5% of people who are clinically depressed have what is called treatment-resistant depression, meaning they can try almost anything and it doesn't work. However, and again, this is kind of getting to future content, but what's pretty cool right now is there's a lot of experimental use with hallucinogenic drugs like ketamine, psilocybin, and they're actually having great success with people who have not done well on traditional antidepressants, who have not been able to be treated by anything, that are responding well for ketamine clinics. Now, right now, like, for example, in Nashville, I live in Tennessee, there's a ton of these ketamine clinics popping up. Unfortunately, no insurance covers them. It's working for people like unbelievably. Here in the U.S., in the Veterans Administration, which is the government organization here that takes care of veterans' health issues, they've had some success using hyperbaric chambers, which they usually use to heal wounds quicker. But they found that people suffering from PTSD and CPTSD, complex PTSD, being put in those hyperbaric chambers actually helps them to heal their trauma responses, which is amazing. But the VA won't pay for it yet, right? So that whole issue of like paying for this, and so while you'll hear Andy and I talk throughout these podcast episodes about the importance of getting help, we're also going to push that issue of making it easier and easier for people to get help when they want it, making it more normalized to get help. Because the last thing you need, once you've reach the decision to get help, the last thing you should have to think about is, how am I going to pay for this, or can I pay for this? Like, that should be the last thing. It makes me angry to think about it, like that's even an issue, and so yeah, that's part of what we hope to push here too, is not just raising awareness, but also making it easier for people to actually get the help when they need it, including helping employers and supervisors and managers be more responsive. And yeah, I think that's extremely important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Is there anything you want to add? Any personal experiences?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. Because um, sure, I have the degree or whatever, but that's not where most of my understanding has come from. And I've worked in this field. Worked as a therapist, a director of a community mental health center. But um, every morning I get up and I take two different medications. Well, I take a number of medications, but two specifically for mental health issues. So I take an antidepressant every day, and I take a medication to help me with my adult ADD. I have attention deficit disorder, something I wasn't sure was real, something I wasn't diagnosed with in school as a child because I don't have the hyperactive type. I just have the easily to be distracted type. And so I'm not one of these people who like bounces off the walls or whatever. But I'm someone who can get, I'm kind of like the from the Disney movie Up, where the dog's like squirrel. I mean, that's me. Like you know what I mean? Like I can, as
Yeah,
you'll probably unfortunately tell, it'll be your misfortune to be a co-host with me because sometimes you'll have to be, all right, Todd, let's bring this back over here to this. This My students sometimes, one of them messed up and told my wife one time that they intentionally try to get me off topic because they know that I'll just rant for 30 minutes and then they don't have to do any work in the class. But yeah, so I take an antidepressant and I take medicine for my ADD every day. And I had an Instagram post not too long ago where I had a picture of my pill box. It's actually sitting here, but I don't know if I can reach it without there being like an avalanche. But like one of my big challenges in the week is to sit down and fill this thing up so that I actually take my meds because there's days when I forget them, which is ridiculous. Like, they only work if you take them. And so I just open up with that, with talking about the medicine, just to say, when I tell you that I have suffered with clinical depression,
I just want to jump in, Todd,
yeah,
because I've got visions of you walking around with that thing under your arm.
No, it's such a. Well, I have a much smaller one, right? Like that's a little bit more portable. But this is the home base one. Now the cool thing is each of these comes off individually, and they have the day, and there's the morning and the night. This is what you have to look through when you hit 50. Andy is large pill organizers. Anyway. But yeah, no, it normally sits on the kitchen table where I can get to it. But it doesn't fill itself up. Like I have to sit down on the weekends and fill it up, and I'm not always the best at that, unfortunately. But yeah, so I've been clinically depressed before, and I've tried to come off the medication before, and that's a whole nother story because you were talking earlier about like we often, you want people to respond the way that you would want to be responded to, and so you respond to people that way, And what's also true, I think, is we're often willing to tell it's okay. We tell other people it's okay to get help, but when it comes to us, we tend to be like we make an exception, like, oh, it's totally fine that guy's taking meds or going to see a therapist or whatever. But for me, that's, you see what I mean? Like that's so hypocritical. Like you have to take your own advice, and so there's been times I've tried to come off the medicine, and I may not even notice it at first, but my wife notices it if I'm, if I haven't taken it in a few days. And that's because I usually start to become pretty angry. And that's what most people don't realize about depression is with depression, sadness and anger are two sides of the same coin. So particularly for men, a lot of clinical depression comes out as angry episodes, like sort of like flying off the handle or just, because we kind of stuff that stuff in. And that's been my experience is a lot of my clinical depression. Yes, I've dealt with the like not wanting to get out of bed before. I've dealt with the, eating too much or not wanting to eat or sleeping all the time or not being able to sleep, those kinds of things. But also just that sudden anger that would even surprise me. Like, where the heck did that come from? Like, where's all that anger coming from? Something that goes along with ADD for some people is some sleep disorders. I actually have something called delayed sleep phase, which affects my mental health tremendously. So my normal circadian rhythms don't really have me getting sleepy till like 2 a.m. So like 2 in the morning. And if I lived in a world where I could sleep from like 2 to 10 every day, I'd be great, but I can't, right? I can't, that's not the world we live in. Mm-hmm. And so I actually sit in front of a light as often as I can in the mornings, which traditionally is called a SAD light, which is a horrible name, but it's called SAD because of seasonal affective disorder. You're probably familiar with that, where there's some people that during the winter, they tend to get depression because there's not as much sunlight outside. outside. And so, but this helps me to sort of reset my circadian rhythms, and I take melatonin at night. That said, the whole sleep issue, depression, ADD, all sort of gets wadded up into one ball in terms of the way it feels for me, right? Like it's just hard for me to get as much done as I want to in a day. That feeling of you saying like, I'm not really being, I don't feel like I'm myself, those kinds of things. Which is tricky because I know exactly what you're talking about. And at the same time, there's also that part of where we have to kind of accept of like, maybe we're trying to change ourselves to be something different than we need to be, maybe something society's expecting instead of trying to be, true to ourselves. But nonetheless, what everybody wants is to have like goals and things you want to do, spend time with your family, be fully present for your wife, fully present for your kids, and not being able to do that, right? That's what sucks. And so that's when you step back and go, okay, this is not just a personality thing or whatever. This is, I'm not able to do the things I want to do. I'm not able to enjoy life. And so that's, where it's all at for me is in terms of like, are you just able to enjoy life? And often mental health issues is what gets in front of it. I've never had a suicide attempt, but I was suicidal at a couple different points in my life. And by that, I mean, I was having thoughts about suicide, about maybe it'd be just better to check myself out of this situation. Like it'd be so much better for everybody around me and myself and those kinds of things. And even started thinking about specific plans, those kind of stuff, but it never went any further, than that. Thank God. But I've been there. I know what it's like to feel like, oh, I just can't take this pain anymore. Like I can't go another minute feeling the way I'm currently feeling, And so I've been there. Like I've been there, and I have to take the medication to kind of keep that at bay. And for me, there's a family history. I look through and I see a lot of history I didn't even know until I dug deeper to find out. And there is a genetic component to a lot of mental illnesses, particularly things like, clinical depression and as you pointed out earlier, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this in other episodes, but as you pointed out earlier, like you were mentioning when you were overseas and were diagnosed with depression, and you're like, I don't really think that, and it's an important point. It's like when you're going through something like being in, actively in the military, particularly if it's during times of conflict, it would be normal to have a depressive reaction because you're going through tough stuff. So just like when you lose a loved one, you have someone die in your family, it would be normal to be depressed. And so when we're talking about clinical depression, we're talking about sort of getting stuck in a place that you just can't get out of, and there's not any real reason specifically, going on there. And two, we often look for, like you were talking about, right now, job is a big part of the stress for you. And I think that's true for a lot of men. In fact, you and I have even talked about that a little bit. So, when we talk about mental health, we're not going to just talk about the illnesses, but we're also going to talk about like, how do we manage like being dads, being husbands, having a job, having a boss that's not the greatest, doing work we don't enjoy, or maybe doing work we do enjoy, but there's other circumstances at the work that makes it difficult. I mean, these are all issues that men do not talk enough about. And I think that particularly with midlife, people sort of look at and like a lot of what I've experienced, and I just turned 50 this past November, be 51 this year, is I often struggle with that feeling of, gosh, I'm not where I thought I would be. Like I've not got to the point in life where this is not what I thought my life would look like when I hit 51. You know what I'm saying? Granted, there's tons of things I look around and I go, like I'm incredibly blessed, like I'm living a dream life in a lot of ways, right? But then there's parts, particularly about myself, that I'm disappointed in, that I've not been able to do X, Y, Z, or I'm not more successful in my job or whatever, right? And so I think that's true for a lot of men. But no, I've been there in terms of the clinical depression. And again, that's why I led with the medication thing, is because I have to take my medication every day, and sometimes I miss doses, and that's not cool. But that's just reality. That's my struggle. It even gets hard to take the medicine sometimes. You know what I mean? Because I'll just get off track and get sort of out of sorts and just kind of skip it and not think about it because my head's not in the right place. So yeah, that's me. So yeah, I got the PhD, but I also have the ADD and the clinical depression. Yeah.
But it's not a weakness just because you take tablets and pills. It's not a weakness.
Right.
But yeah, no, thanks for that. I'm going to push this on now because we're coming up to nearly 50 minutes already, and we could go on all night. I'm sure we could, but So there's a couple more things we want to cover. So I'm big on interaction from people that listen to my podcast and people that watch the YouTube channel. So I put out a post on Facebook and Instagram asking for anybody's got any listener questions, and somebody came back, contacted me via a message on Facebook.
Oh, cool.
And I won't mention names because it's that there may be. I mean, suppose in the future we can ask if people are happy to use their names, but I won't name names on this occasion. But they basically said, I'd really like to know what normal is. See, with my depression lately, I get up and I say to myself, right, I'm going to have a good day, but my brain is telling me, no, you're not. You're going to be a miserable cunt, and it's a horrible mate. And it's horrible, mate. Sorry. And I'm going to say now, I don't know what you're like, but sometimes I have a potty mouth, and normally every other word that comes out of my mouth is a swear word. So we're not going to be one of those podcasts, or at least I don't want it to be. If you have an objection to it, that's fine. But I think we should take people for who they are. And
I agree totally.
I'm not going to judge you if you're don't you swear, and people shouldn't judge me just because I've got a fucking potty mouth.
There you go. I had to catch myself where I go when I was talking about insurance. I about dropped the F-bomb in front of talking about it. I was like, whoa, let's hold back. No, I agree. No, I think you have to be real. And I think part of language is getting emotion out, right? And so, that's the kind of questions we want, where people are expressing what they feel. So what is normal, right? Like that whole issue, right?
Yeah, well, we'll say that. I don't think we want it. I don't think we should get into it on this intro, because the whole point of this episode was just an intro, really.
Yeah.
So we'll park it and we'll come back to it.
Definitely.
So thank you, Mr. X. We'll call him Mr. X.
Right.
It was a male. Right. So really, I suppose that leads us on to the final part of this episode, and that's the direction we want the podcast to go in. And it isn't just, we don't want it to just be a podcast. We want it to be not movement isn't really the right term for it, but a force for good. Obviously, Todd has the Take Care Man website. He owns that domain, so we'll probably lean on that side of things. If it does take off in a massive way, then we'll look at maybe, I don't know, like I said, we haven't even got a name for the podcast yet. The name we're using is just an interim sort of thing. So
that's right.
We want people to interact with us. We want not only make it a podcast talking about mental health, we want to, like you touched on earlier, we want it to be educational. We want to get people on that have been in high positions, management positions, and we want to get people on. And I'm not going to make secrets of it. I want to get well-known people on, celebrities, whoever. It doesn't have to be celebrities. It can be anybody. So if you want to come on and talk to us about a specific element, like I'd like to think we can kind of structure each episode with maybe a topic or whatever. I mean, it's all very much up in the air at the minute. We're kind of just ironing it out and deciding how we're going to tackle it. But I suppose from my point of view, I don't want it to be ultra serious. I want people to be to feel like they can come to us if they need to, even if it's just like, look, I'm struggling, and come to me, come to Todd, speak to us. You know what I mean? Because sometimes the first step is speaking to somebody and reaching out and putting your hand up and saying, look, I'm struggling here, and that is sometimes the hardest bit. So obviously, the podcast is just one element of it. We'll probably interact it, interact, is that the word? Incorporate it into our own YouTube channels, because I don't want that to go away. I enjoy doing the channel, and my aim at some point is to get 1,000 subscribers. I'm nowhere near that at the minute, but then I think that opens up a few more opportunities on YouTube. You can do the YouTube lives and Instagram, incorporate that into the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. But if I could just interject, I would like to see us too, like have, whether it's on a website or through a Discord server or through a Facebook group or whatever, have a private group where we have to approve people to come in, not in an exclusionary way, but just because we don't get bots and stuff like that in there, and also just keeping it a safe community. But we'd like to have a place, I think, where listeners are able to talk about these issues too, separate and apart from the podcast, to be able to have forums and that kind of thing where people can support each other. I mean, I'd like to see that be part of what we do, and that's something you and I've talked about. And so, yeah, I mean, this is about, me and Andy talking about this stuff, but it's only going to be as good as, input we get from other people and guests and listeners. But we really do want to build I think, a culture around this where people are willing to talk and willing to, listen to others and help each other out. It's really powerful to hear that you're not the only one going through something, for me, that's been some of the most powerful points in my life when I look to someone who I held up as being strong, successful, all this kind of stuff, and to hear that they're going through something currently, right? It's always blown me away and made me feel like, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe I can make it, maybe I'm not alone, that kind of thing. So that's definitely a part of what we want to do with this, most definitely.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think I'll say as well from an early point, if there is anybody out there listening, a company or whoever, because podcasts and social media are a good platform. You don't know who could be listening. If there's somebody out there that's a company owner, it doesn't have to be a global company; it can be anybody that wants to sponsor us. That's not a money thing. That just means we can do more as a community if we have some sponsorship and we can put out better content.
Yeah.
We can have that leverage to get, I suppose, the big celebrities on board. And I'm getting way ahead of myself. Let's not.
Well, yeah, I'll just touch on that though and say, like, we might start a Patreon or some sort of place people can donate as well. And we haven't talked about this, but I know we've talked enough where I feel like we'd be fine with like having the financial books open where people can even see what we do with the donations and stuff. We're just here basically to try to help, ourselves, honestly, and other men just have a place. It's not just about we're here, we're experts, we are talking about, but it's helpful. Just sitting down and talking to Andy is incredibly helpful to me. Knowing that there's people listening is helpful to me as well, right? So, but we're here obviously to try to create things or make things different for a whole lot of men. And I would actually not back off of the word that you said when you said movement. I do want us to be a part of a larger movement, and I think that is happening from a lot of different angles. And I definitely want us to be a part of it and be a part of making things different. Because again, for me, at the end of the day, it's what I look at is like the group of men that are, or the group of people, period, that are most at risk for suicide right now are middle-aged men. So that's why we're in this space, is to try to step in that and normalize getting help for mental health issues.
Yeah, no, you're right. So I think just before we wrap this one up, if there is anybody out there listening to this, and I don't know how many people are going to listen to this first intro, but if you are sat there listening to it and you are sat there thinking, well, actually, I am struggling and I want some help, come to me or come to Todd. You can get us on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, and we'll put all the links in the description of the podcast and on the website and such. But yeah, come to us as a first point, and there's no guarantee we'll be able to solve your problems, but we may be able to signpost you in the direction of somebody that can help. And that's right. I think that's important. It's about helping each other, and part of we touched on it earlier. Putting your hand up and saying, look, I'm struggling is sometimes the hardest, but the first step to getting on the straight and narrow and getting better in some instances. So, yeah, if this is relevant to you, this topic, and you have been sort of, I don't know, not hiding, but have been afraid to step forward and speak to one of us. It doesn't. Sometimes speaking and just offloading to a stranger or somebody you don't really speak to helps. A problem shared is a problem halved, as they say here in the UK. I don't know whether that's somewhere they say it elsewhere.
Oh yeah, yep, exactly.
But yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. We could go on for forever, I think. But
so we're not fully at the hour, almost to the hour. I just thought let's do something fun in here. So I got just a couple quick questions for you. Okay, so for a favorite Star Wars character, we found out that we're both Star Wars nerds. So favorite Star Wars character.
That's a good question. I think, I was going to put in a little quiz on this, but I put my hand up and say I didn't. I've had a good day today, actually, and that's rare for me. The sun's been out, and I'm backtracking slightly again, but just getting out in the sun has made a difference to me and having a laugh. But anyway, favorite Star Wars character? Oh, that's a good question. See, there's probably so many that I don't know, but I'm going to say Han Solo.
Yeah, he's pretty awesome. Yeah, those kind of questions. It's always like, who would I most like to be like, or who do I think's the coolest? Like I think Darth Maul is really cool. Like I think that character is amazingly cool. It's hard not to pick Obi-Wan as being like Obi-Wan Kenobi as being like the coolest. But I'm a huge Ahsoka fan.
Who's your favorite Obi-Wan?
I like him in episode 3 when he's having to fight, Anakin. I mean, I love him also in episode 4, but Ewan McGregor does a great job, I think, playing the character. But yeah, I mean, I like his humor too. I like how funny he is, like the stuff that he cracks on. I'm also a big Ahsoka Tano fan. All right, so one other question. So, how do you take your tea?
Just milk, no sugar. I'm a professional tea drinker. Yeah, I'm a professional tea drinker. So, I think it is important how you make that tea. So, in Yorkshire, if you put your milk in before you take the tea bag out, you will be hung, drawn, and quartered. Really? It is not the right way to make a cup of tea, and it's the same discussion, I suppose, about which way around you put the toilet roll on. Whether you have the trailing end over the front or around the back. It's the same with tea. Tea should be made, it should be made in a teapot, really, if you're going to have
So at home, are you going loose leaf, or are you using bags? What are you doing?
No, it's bags. No, I've never used loose.
Okay, so Yorkshire Gold, Yorkshire Red, or some other tea?
I'll probably get chastised for this. I don't drink Yorkshire tea. I find it a little bit stronger. I drink PG Tips in the pyramid bag. So
I'm gonna have to see if I can find that on Amazon.
My friend, he lives in Texas as well. Todd Oglesby. I sent him. He loves Yorkshire tea. I sent him a care package a few weeks ago, and he loves his Yorkshire tea. But PG Tips is my poison when it comes to tea. I do like a cup of PG Tips.
And what about your coffee? Because I know you said when you're out and about and you can't make your coffee, your tea at home, you just pick up a coffee. So.
I don't drink tea when I'm out, like Starbucks or Caustic, because there's nothing worse than a bad cup of tea. So I do like coffee. I'll always choose tea over coffee, but I'm a bit of a coffee snob. It has to be decent coffee. So I normally have a latte or a latte or however you want to pronounce it. So
right.
Or a flat white sometimes.
Flat white, yeah. I'm more of a cappuccino guy. I like the foam. No syrup, no sweetness. At home, I'm mostly pour over black coffee. But yeah, I could, back in the day, I could drink like the pumpkin spice lattes and the sweetened lattes, but not anymore. I just have to. I really like just a plain cappuccino, no syrup.
Nice. I don't mind a cappuccino. Yeah, I'll give you that. But yeah, no, I think that is it. I like that. It is just something. It's a little bit lighthearted, and yeah. It's not all about mental health. I'm sure we'll go off at tangent, and we'll talk about other stuff.
I can get pretty banana shaped about Star Wars and when I don't have my coffee. So I think it's kind of related to mental health. To be honest with you,
we'll have to do an episode on mental health and the movies.
That's the truth.
But yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, Todd, and I'm glad we've finally managed to get this off the ground. I mean, we've only been talking about it probably, I'd say 3 weeks, 4 weeks maximum.
Yeah. About 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, obviously, if you are a wet shaving fan, make sure you tune into Todd's channel, the Take Care Man. Obviously, I've got my channel, the Opinionated Brit. I've also got it's a shameless plug at the minute. Get it in where I can.
Sure, of course.
But obviously, there's my own podcast, the Opinionated Brit podcast. I think I'm recording the first episode of next season 3, with. I'm going to have to check now. I think it's either Peter Chikalis from A&E or it's Douglas Smythe from PAA. So,
you got a great lineup coming up for this season, no doubt.
So that's being recorded next week, and then this episode we'll try and get it edited next week. So hopefully this will be released sometime next week. But yeah, if anybody has got any specific topics or questions or anything they want us to speak about, let us know, either me or Todd. We will get round to setting up a proper, I suppose, section on the Take Care Man channel.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got any ideas for the name for the podcast, let us know, because we want, if we can't decide what we're going to call it, we're going to put it out to the listeners and let them come up with the ideas. So,
Yeah, if I could just interject really quickly, so if in case, because I have encountered a lot of some people in wet shaving community, and also it could be anybody listening to this podcast that's not on Instagram or not on Facebook, and there are people like that. At least in the interim, till we do something else, you can actually email me at Todd. That's TODD at takecareman.com. I do have that email address. You can send it if you have a question before our next episode, or if you want to reach out before our next episode. And then obviously you can contact both Andy and I between on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube for that matter. And as Andy said, we'll put all those contact methods in the links.
yeah, no, that's a very good point, Todd. You can get me as well if you want to email me. You can email me at theopinionatedbrit at Outlook. No, it's not. Yes, it is. theopinionatedbrit at outlook.com. So yeah, get in touch with either myself or Todd. Anyway, is fine. But we will be back. What should we say? 2 weeks.
Sounds good. Sounds great.
That gives us enough time to try and decide what we're going to try and cuff next. But no, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed speaking to you, Todd. Hopefully somebody, even if one person listening to this gets something from it, that's a win from our point of view.
Most definitely.
But yeah, stay safe, everyone. And please reach out, I guess, if you are struggling. But yeah, from me, thank you. And Todd, over to you.
See you guys next time. Thanks for listening.
Cool, guys. Cheers. Thanks, Todd.
Bye.